Israel kills 20 in attack on al-Mawasi camp in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes on al-Mawasi camp in Gaza has killed at least 20 Palestinians and wounded dozens. Gaza's health ministry says Israeli attacks killed 30 Palestinians and wounded 84 in the latest 24-hour reporting period. Amjad Shawa, director of the Palestinian NGOs network, says humanitarian situation in Gaza is worsening as winter approaches with only a trickle of aid coming in. Israel's genocide in Gaza has killed at least 44,532 Palestinians and wounded 105,538 since October 7, 2023. At least 1,139 people were killed in Israel during the Hamas-led attacks that day, and more than 200 were taken captive. In Lebanon, at least 4,047 people have been killed and 16,638 wounded in Israeli attacks since the war on Gaza began. At least 44,532 people killed and 105,538 wounded in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7, 2023. More than 100 patients inside the besieged Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of the enclave are at risk of death. The Israeli army claims it targeted senior Hamas members in its attack on the al-Mawasi camp in southern Gaza, where at least 20 Palestinians were killed. The Prisoners' Affairs Commission, PAC, and the Palestine Prisoners Society, PPS, have reported that a Palestinian detainee has died in Israeli detention. Israeli forces severely beat an elderly man on his land in the occupied West Bank town of Akraba in the Nablus Governorate. Qatar's PM says the incoming U.S. administration wants a Gaza ceasefire deal secured now, today even. UNRWA says Israel has increased a disinformation campaign against the agency through a series of billboard advertisements. Israeli army claims that the 6 captives found in Khan Yunis in August could have been killed by Hamas, but refused to rule out that an Israeli air strike killed them. The Israeli military is not acting humanely or doing Palestinians a favor when it threatens them with death by bombing if they do not leave their homes and makeshift shelters. It is not driving exhausted, starving people constantly from one place to another under threat of death and maiming, using difficult-to-decipher guidance, out of humanitarian concern. It is doing so to ensure nowhere in Gaza is safe for Palestinians. It is trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, creating the illusion of adherence to humanitarian law while laying the groundwork for illegally expanding Israeli territory. Israel's growth forecast cut amid wars and conflicts. The Times of Israel is reporting that the country's wars on Gaza and Lebanon, as well as the conflict with Iran, are expected to continue to take a toll on the country's economy and finances. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the evolving conflicts in the Middle East since October 2023 will continue to shape economic activity, the OECD said in its Economic Outlook report. After a fast recovery from the slump in the aftermath of October 7, 2023, private consumption has grown sluggishly, with consumer confidence remaining weak in October 2024. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry has condemned what it called brutal attacks by terrorist settler militias on 2 towns near Nablus in the occupied West Bank. The violent Israeli settlers set fire to property and vehicles in the towns amid intensifying daily assaults on Palestinians. The settlers have been emboldened to commit these crimes in the occupied territory by the glaring and unjustifiable failure of the global community to stop the Israeli killings, the ministry said. Reuters news agency is reporting that the incoming U.S. Middle East envoy met Qatari and Israeli PMs to push for a ceasefire and captives deal. A source briefed on the talks told Reuters that Steve Witkoff traveled to Qatar and Israel in late November to push for a deal before Trump's inauguration on January 20th. The meetings signal that Qatar has resumed its role as a key mediator after suspending it last month. The source added that Hamas negotiators would likely return to Doha soon to facilitate a new round of talks. Jordan's king. Failure to stop war will exacerbate regional conflict. Failure to stop Israel's war on Gaza will exacerbate the conflict and the cycle of violence in the region, according to Jordan's King Abdullah. He added that immediate action must be taken to pressure Israel to allow sufficient aid into the besieged enclave where more than 44,500 Palestinians have been killed since October last year. 6-year-old Nasser Tanitra is scared of the rock-strewn hilltop where he used to play and pick flowers near his family home. The boisterous child, the youngest of 7 siblings, used to dash to the top of Jabal al-Ras with his 10-year-old sister Yurud to gather wild sage and za'atar. But in mid-September, about 20 Israeli settlers, protected by soldiers, erected tents and began living on the hilltop, about 50 meters, 164 feet, from the family's two-story home. Ever since, they have attacked and harassed the Quneitras and their neighbors in the Palestinian village of Msafa. At night, the settlers fire bullets in the air and release aggressive dogs to roam outside villagers' homes. From above, they flash bright lights onto the houses, blare music, and sing loudly. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar says there may now be an opportunity to secure the return of the captives held in Gaza, the Times of Israel reports. Sa'ar, who was speaking at an OSCE Foreign Ministers Conference in Malta, said Israel is serious about reaching a deal to get them out and asked for the European Union's support in gaining a deal. According to Sa'ar's office, the minister told EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas that Israel wants to open a new page in our relations with the European Union, one of constructive dialogue and cooperation. Josep Borrell, Kallas's predecessor, regularly criticized Israel for its conduct in the wars on Gaza and Lebanon. Israeli forces arrest Palestinian patient in West Bank hospital raid. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the occupied West Bank said Israeli forces raided a hospital in Nablus and arrested a patient. The ministry in a statement called it a flagrant violation of all international laws and conventions that stipulate the protection of treatment centers and patients. Earlier, Palestinian media reported that special forces from the Israeli army stormed the Arab Specialized Hospital and arrested Ayman Ghanem, who was wounded in a bombing near the town of Aqaba on Tuesday. Israel claims it targeted Hamas members in deadly al-Mawasi attack. The Israeli army claims it targeted senior Hamas members in its attack on al-Mawasi camp in southern Gaza, where at least 20 Palestinians were killed. The army said secondary explosions that were identified suggested the presence of weaponry in the area. According to Palestinian civil defense teams, dozens of people were wounded in addition to those killed. Israeli officials say only agreement can bring back captives held in Gaza. The Israeli Broadcasting Authority quotes security sources as saying only an agreement can bring back the captives held in Gaza, adding that information about their whereabouts is dwindling. The officials also said those taken captive cannot be brought back alive by a military operation and a deal must be reached and concessions must be made. At least 10 people killed in Israeli attack on Gaza City. At least 10 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City. Israel's war in Gaza amounts to genocide, Amnesty International report finds. Human rights group says Israel brazenly, continuously, and with total impunity, unleashed hell on Strip's 2.3 million population. A report from Amnesty International alleges that Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip constitutes the crime of genocide under international law, the first such determination by a major human rights organization in the 14-month-old conflict. The 296-page report examining events in Gaza between October 2023 to July 2024, published on Thursday, found that Israel had brazenly, continuously, and with total impunity unleashed hell on the Strip's 2.3 million population, noting that the atrocity crimes against Israelis by Hamas on October 7, 2023, which triggered the war, do not justify genocide. Israel has committed prohibited acts under the Genocide Convention, namely killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, and deliberately inflicting on Palestinians in Gaza conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction, with the specific intent to destroy Palestinians in the territory, the report said. It marks the first time Amnesty has alleged the crime of genocide during an ongoing conflict, and builds on a March report by the UN Special Rapporteur for Palestine that concluded there are reasonable grounds to believe Israel was committing genocide against Palestinians. Our damning findings must serve as a wake-up call. This is genocide and it must stop now, Agnes Callamard, the group's Secretary General, said in a news conference on Wednesday. Amnesty cited the deliberate obstruction of aid and power supplies together with massive damage, destruction, and displacement, leading to the collapse of water, sanitation, food, and healthcare systems, in what it called a pattern of conduct within the context of the occupation and blockade of Gaza. We did not necessarily start out thinking we would come to this conclusion. We knew there was a risk of genocide, as the International Court of Justice said, but our Hassan, Amnesty's Israel and occupied Palestinian territories researcher, told The Guardian. When you join the dots together, the totality of the evidence, it is not just violations of international law. This is something deeper. The main allegations in the report are the unprecedented scale and magnitude of the military offensive, which has caused death and destruction at a speed and level unmatched in any other 21st century conflict. Intent to destroy, after considering and discounting arguments such as Israeli recklessness and callous disregard for civilian life in the pursuit of Hamas, killing and causing serious bodily or mental harm in repeated direct attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, or deliberately indiscriminate attacks and inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, such as destroying medical infrastructure, the obstruction of aid, and repeated use of arbitrary and sweeping evacuation orders for 90% of the population to unsuitable areas. As an occupying power, Israel is legally obliged to provide for the needs of the occupied population, Christine Becquerel, an advisor to Amnesty's Middle East and North Africa team, said on Wednesday. She described Israel's May offensive on Rafah, until then the last place of relative safety in the Strip, as a major turning point when it came to establishing intent. Israel had made Rafah the main aid point, and it knew civilians would go there. The ICJ ordered them to stop, and they went ahead anyway, she said. Rafah was key. At least 47 people, including 4 children, were killed in airstrikes across Gaza on Tuesday, according to health officials in the territory, including at least 21 who were sheltering in tent camp housing displaced people near the city of Khan Yunis. The Israeli military said it had targeted Hamas militants. Amnesty has called on the UN to enforce a ceasefire, impose targeted sanctions on Israeli and top Hamas officials, and for Western governments such as the US, the UK, and Germany to stop providing security assistance and selling arms to Israel. The rights group has also urged the International Criminal Court, which last month issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, to add genocide to the list of war crimes it is investigating. Finally, it called for the unconditional release of civilian hostages and for Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups responsible for the crimes committed on October 7th to be held to account. The report, "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman: Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza," is likely to be met with outrage in Israel and generate accusations of anti-Semitism. Several legal experts and genocide studies scholars contend that the October 7th attack was also genocidal. The Holocaust led to the creation of the Jewish state and the Geneva Conventions, which codified and outlawed genocide as a punishable crime. Both initiatives were the international community's never again response to the horrors inflicted on European Jews by the Nazis in World War II. In its conclusion, the report says that Amnesty recognizes that there is resistance and hesitancy among many in finding genocidal intent when it comes to Israel's conduct in Gaza, which has impeded justice and accountability. Amnesty International concedes that identifying genocide in armed conflict is complex and challenging because of the multiple objectives that may exist simultaneously. Nonetheless, it is critical to recognize genocide and to insist that war can never excuse it, it states. Amnesty said the report was based on fieldwork, interviews with 212 people, including victims, witnesses, and healthcare workers in Gaza, analysis of extensive visual and digital evidence, and more than 100 statements from Israeli government and military actors it said amounted to dehumanizing discourse. It also used video and photo evidence of soldiers committing or celebrating war crimes. Israel's acts in Gaza were examined in their totality, taking into account their recurrence and simultaneous occurrence, and both their immediate impact and their cumulative and mutually reinforcing consequences, it said. Findings were shared extensively on multiple occasions with Israeli authorities, the group added, but were not met with responses. Thursday's publication builds on the London-based rights group's previous bold positions on Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. In 2022, Amnesty joined Human Rights Watch and the respected Israeli NGO B'Tselem in issuing a major report accusing Israel of apartheid, as part of a growing movement to redefine the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a struggle for equal rights rather than a territorial dispute. Israeli politicians called for the report to be withdrawn, alleging anti-Semitism. Virtually no aid has reached besieged North Gaza in 40 days, UN says. Palestinians are facing diminishing conditions for survival in parts of northern Gaza under siege by Israeli forces because virtually no aid has been delivered in 40 days, the United Nations has warned. The UN said all its attempts to support the estimated 65,000 to 75,000 people in Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and Jabalia this month had been denied or impeded, forcing bakeries and kitchens to shut down. Earlier this month, a UN-backed assessment said there was a strong likelihood that famine was imminent in areas of northern Gaza. The Israeli military has said its 6-week-long offensive targets regrouping Hamas fighters, and that it is facilitating civilian evacuations and supply deliveries to hospitals. Hundreds of people have been killed, and between 100,000 and 130,000 others have been displaced to Gaza City, where the UN has said essential resources like shelter, water, and healthcare are severely limited. Meanwhile, the U.S. vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution that demanded